Hello, and welcome to part 3 of our 3-part interview with Thomas Paquette, where we pick up the conversation today about his methods, motivations, and inspirations. We hope you enjoy. Well, Tom, what do you think you'd like to communicate to the public or to your audience with your paintings? And I realize this is a loaded question because, painters paint to communicate. They don't write words to communicate. But if you could suggest some thought process that is behind a lot of your work today, that would be interesting to our audience, I think.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps foremost is just the idea of the value of really seeing things. I mean, throughout the day, you and I'm assuming for you, but I think 99.9% of people hardly really see throughout 99.9% of the day. It's only those moments of almost like lucidity that we really perceive. And, often I think that's why sunsets strike people. It's because all of a sudden there's this transitory moment that they're drawn back, snapped back to this reality that my eyes are seeing something that's unusual and colorful, whatever. And I guess what I'm after is just getting people to understand the value of their vision.
Would you try to put a spiritual quality or obviously you're feeling some emotion when you're out there in the landscape painting? Do you try and bring that and instill that in your paintings?
I see that kind of as two different aspects. I mean, when I'm out in nature, for instance, I've actually stopped doing a lot of almost all oil paintings out in nature just because my process is so long that it's counterproductive to drag all my materials out there only to work for an hour and then having to wait a couple days for it to dry. It doesn't work, I love being out in nature. We are, part of nature, and I love being dissolved into it. But I also like being dissolved into the paint, and I don't try to do anything, I think, in a way. I mean, I don't try to put spirit in. I think that the spirit we have gets in there no matter what we do. I think that we can't deny who we are while we're painting. It just comes out, and that's part of the spirit of it. And our relationship to painting. And that's what I'm really saying. It's not like an inferior person will make an inferior painting. No, it's the person who isn't as much tuned into the spirit of painting, I suppose. There you go with spirit. Isn't going to be doing a spiritual painting. So when I work, I'm not really trying consciously to put anything in that brings that out. But I've had a number of my works bought by very spiritual people, and they've made note of that. They said, something along those lines, and I don't want to say I recoil, but I'm a little surprised. It's because I wasn't really trying to, jazz it up that way. It was that's just what happened.
The other thing that interests me personally is that you paint the Midwest a lot, that you've done a lot of subject matter, even though you've lived all over, you have done quite a body of work of paintings of the Midwest landscape. And that is somewhat counter to the flow right now, the passion, the trend toward all this Western art that everybody's so gaga over. Do you find people interested in your subject matter, this Midwestern landscape?
Well, people do tend to relate to places they know. And I had, at my show in Minneapolis, somebody came from North Dakota to buy one of my paintings of the prairie. And it was actually just a few miles outside of the Twin Cities that I painted this thing, but they saw it as being very much like something dear to them that they know. And so I think part of it has to do with a worldliness that can get beyond place in a way, too, that makes people appreciate, the great skies or the big, vast, flat ocean of land in the Midwest. But it is counter, but I don't see it as being, I don't really think about it. I don't really try to follow trends. I do understand and see in a lot of the contemporary art magazines that Western landscape has for years gotten a lot of notice, and a lot of the artists out there are featured prominently, whereas in the East or the Midwest, not as much. And I don't see anything wrong with being a great artist no matter where you are.
Right. That's so true. I'd have to agree with that. You were talking about doing these little 2x3-inch gouaches. Do you paint those outside and then use those as the basis for larger oils in the studio?
Yes, I do start. I almost never even finish a gouache outdoors, because I like John Singer Sargent, I would love to say, because they really don't take that long. It isn't like they're tedious in ways, but they do take a lot of reconfiguration sometimes. They get done in the studio too. And sometimes I will actually be working on an oil painting, then decide that I really need to do a gouache to help figure out some basic things about the painting. So it actually goes both ways. I've actually finished gouaches after I've gotten done with large paintings, just because I want to, almost like double checking my work. It's like, is that what I really wanted? Is there another direction I could try? Because I'm, again, not too afraid of destroying a painting, but doing a gouache is a way of not destroying the painting and still checking something out that I have a suspicion about.
Yeah, I like that. I think that for artists who are trying to learn the craft, it's a good lesson to learn how much work is involved in developing a painting and getting your vision out, that you may have to go through this process, as we all do, and develop multiple sketches and rework things, and it just doesn't come out because you're a great genius and you have this incredible talent you might have been born with. That most painters, I think, have to work pretty hard at it, don't they?
Oh, absolutely sure of that. You mentioned John Singer Sargent working so hard, and I saw a show at the Corcoran maybe a year ago. I couldn't, he's an astonishing artist. I mean, he really is. But seeing his small early works made me realize, yeah, he's endowed with a lot of talent, but talent doesn't come from nowhere. I mean, I believe a person might be born with a propensity and a capacity to do something, but I don't think that they're born with this innate talent. He developed that, and anybody can. And I think that's important for beginning artists to understand. All their frustration isn't for naught, basically.
Yeah, that's right. Anybody can. I like that. It's true. We need to encourage more creativity in the world, especially since art classes are usually the first thing to be cut in schools. And so where does the young artist learn anything anymore? Where do they get encouragement either, also? Well, we hope that, partially through these interviews and meeting professional artists in this form, they can receive some of this wisdom and this encouragement over the internet, where they might not have had access to it through their own communities and schools. So what words of advice would you offer to a young artist who's pondering and making that decision and thinking about becoming a professional?
The best answer I ever heard for that was Neil Welver saying to a group, somebody raised their hand and asked that, and he said, "Don't do it." Because he knows the frustration involved and all that. If you have to ask that question of yourself, then maybe you're not entirely, sure that that's the direction you need to be going. But that, it's a tough world, and we all, if I wish I could say that I had no frustrations along the way. I mean, it's fraught with as many frustrations as there are rewards, if not more, possibly. I mean, it happens in every artwork, let alone the larger world. So maybe that's my advice right there, is that frustration is part of the process, and that as much as you'll find in your artwork, you'll also find it out there, and the thing to do is kind of ignore that and just persist. Henry David Thoreau, there's one more thing. He was very inspirational. One thing that he was really adamant about in his writings, and I don't know where he wrote it, but I remember reading this, that he said, "My goal is to be a student all my life." and forego those other things that just get in the way of that. And you know that he did that with Walden by, going off and living in the woods. Like, I want to just be this hermit for a little bit and write. And I think he carried that with him the rest of his life too, just paring it down to the essential and trying to learn, keeping that curiosity alive. And that struck me as a good philosophy of life, is just to live by your heart in a way, and try to understand what it is that you need to do most.
Words of wisdom. I think that's great advice for anybody. Great advice for anybody trying to lead a creative life, to lead with your heart and just stay at it. Yeah.
I hope so. I hope we can all do it.
Well, Tom, we want to thank you for talking to us this morning on the Artist Road. It's been a real pleasure hearing your thoughts about art and your own painting.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.